Good evening, everyone. You're most welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening on Let's Talk Equine. Wherever in the country or outside of it that you happen to be, we really appreciate your time in joining us. And we hope also that there may be some pertinent and important messages for you to bring home to your own enterprises and bring to action over the coming months and beyond. I'm delighted to be joined here this evening by a trio of equine vets and ladies, and thank you very much. You're from well representing the regions tonight. We have Sue over in Wicklow, Hazel down in Cork, and Nikki not too far away from me in County Limerick. So ladies, thank you very much for being with me and with our listeners here this evening. I suppose, look, first before we get going, I'll just give a shout out to those who are watching. If you're somebody that is new to us, we have a Q&A facility on Zoom. You can scroll across the buttons that are available on your screen and you should find a Q&A button, and you're most welcome to input your questions there at any point throughout this evening's discussion, and I'll refer back to those intermittently and bring them to the ladies this evening. So I suppose, look, maybe first what we'll do is just go around the houses and get a little bit of an insight into who you are, what your day-to-day job is. And maybe I'll start up in the top of my screen as I view it here with yourself, Sue, over in my home county, over in Wicklow. What's the day-to-day for you? Who is Sue and what does Sue do?
Sue is Sue, and Sue is an equine vet that set up a vet practice at the back end of 2020, and it's an exclusively equine practice, and we are an ambulatory practice, meaning that we mainly go around to farms, particularly stud farms. We do a lot of breed work. That is the focus of the practice. But in saying that we're ambulatory, we see everything. So it is an everything practice, but with a breed focus. And just to highlight the topic of this evening, we like to do that in a manner which protects antibiotics and protects our dewormers, and that is a huge focus of the practice.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll come to the topic in a moment. But that's super to know and understand the perspective that you come from. I'm just going to run around my screen in the logical order of where I see the tiles this evening. So Hazel, you're next. And you're joining us from the county of Cork, where my mother actually was brought up. So I'm going back to another area that I'm close to. So,
well, I'm sure you're a fabulous woman. So, yeah, I'm a very proud Cork woman, and I'm also the current president of Veterinary Ireland. So, it's a big role this year. I'm coming to the end of it now in a couple of weeks, but it's been a really enjoyable year. There's been a lot going on, different regulations, we can talk about it there later, but there's a lot of changes. And look, it's been an interesting year. I'm also a vet in practice. I work kind of part-time in mixed practice, mostly farm animal. I do the odd equine call. I was very touched to be called equine vet there. But I think I definitely probably identify a little bit more as a farm vet. And I'm here as well tonight just to give a perspective from what's going on maybe in the farm world as well, on the ground. But I have had ponies in the past. I dabbled in a bit of polo. I come from quite an equine family background, so I love my horses as well. But maybe more of yes. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, really. I'm dairy farming here in Cork as well with my dad at the moment. So a bit of everything. Yeah.
And you're here to bring a wider perspective tonight as well too. So thank you for that. And Nikki, you're geographically close to me tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, here in Limerick.
Yeah.
So I'm an academic up in UCD. I'm in the equine clinical studies department, but I'm an equine clinician, I suppose, first and foremost, but also because I like to wear many hats, I'm a parasitologist as well. So yeah, I think from that point of view, I'll probably be bringing that side of things in regards to our client practice, relationship, etc. So.
You absolutely will. You absolutely will. And I suppose, look, maybe I was going a little bit for the element of intrigue in putting the title on tonight's discussion for our viewers at home. And that is, of course, the importance of the client practice patient relationship. And it is something that is very dear to each of your hearts, I know, and something that each of you is, for varying reasons, very passionate about. So I suppose maybe Hazel, if I come to yourself first as somebody who is, I suppose, in the seat of representing vets in all practices right around the country. From your perspective, you know, can you maybe explain to our viewers here this evening, I suppose in your own words, the reasons or the key reasons why we're having this conversation this evening?
I'll try anyway, Wendy. It's a very broad topic, and I think look, it's been in the media a lot this year, and it's an SI, statutory instrument, was signed a couple of months ago now. When was it? By the Minister of Agriculture, that brought in that parasitics are now POMs, and they must be prescribed by a vet. So Veterinary Ireland are very much backing that the vet prescribing really should have a CPPR, which is a client practice patient relationship. So that is that, you know, your vet that you call out to your horse for your sick, you know, for your colics or for whatever stud work that you're doing, that's your vet, and your vet knows how your horse, you know, all of that works really, and on your farm and in your premises. So has a good idea of what's going on. Whereas when you don't have a client practice patient relationship, it's a vet that doesn't know your personal horse background, you know, your day-to-day running of your farm. So this is kind of what's going on at the moment. So at the moment, the law is there. There's been a commencement order. But the antiparasitics will be POM from next June. So then we are
medicine, in other words.
Yes. So you will no longer be able to get a wormer for your horse without a prescription from a vet. And we are really trying to encourage that vet has a client-patient relationship with your horse and with your farm. So this is kind of what Veterinary Ireland are really encouraging. We really want to encourage prudent prescribing. We want the drugs that we are prescribing to be prescribed in the best fashion and more prudently. So we reduce antiparasitic resistance going forward in the future. And Nikki will inform us all, and Sue as well, much more eloquently than I can about that. But we're doing our best to represent the profession, and really it's more for the wider public as well, because it all has a connecting to One Health, and we need to preserve the prescribing, prudently prescribe, to make sure that these medications are going to work in the future, and that antimicrobial resistance doesn't increase overall because we're not prescribing prudently.
Yeah, because obviously there are very close relationships between human health, animal health, and the environmental health as well too, and all the interlinkages therein. And I suppose protecting not just, like, obviously human health is critically important, but also that we have access to the most effective medicines available for animal health purposes as well too. So that's all part of the conversation. One other aspect that viewers may or may not be familiar with is the introduction of the Department of Agriculture National Veterinary Prescription System from January next year as well, Hazel, yeah?
Yes, it's all connected. So that's at a commencement
order.
What
does that mean? What does that mean for everybody at home?
So it will be a database where we're by law, by the EU, we need to collect the data of the medications that we're prescribing. So every prescription that we will write for antiparasitics and antimicrobials will be put in a database that will have access to be monitored. So our usage of these medications is going to be much more stringent and I suppose monitored from going forward. So it's going to be a national veterinary prescription service. So every vet in the country, every time they prescribe something, it'll be logged on this system.
Yeah, and I suppose the conversation that we'll come back to as the evening goes around is the choice of who you get to serve you in accessing that system will really be of importance to I suppose, the whole health plan on your farm. Really, isn't that the conversation that we really want to have? Yeah. So look at I'm going to come across first to Nikki, and I suppose where we're going to start the conversation is around the importance of this in relation to the anti-parasitic side of the house and the changes that are coming there. So you're a good woman. You're doing the share from your side. That's brilliant. So
yeah, if that's okay. I'm not as able to do off the cuff as Hazel, so I'm afraid I put together a few slides. Heaven forbid I'd come to one of these, Wendy, without a slide. So okay, for me, even if we put aside all new legislations and all new systems that are in place, etc. I suppose this is something which I know Wendy and Sue are well used to me talking about in relation to getting vets involved in parasite control, because it's not normally something that we see maybe as a vet's role, unfortunately. And the reason I put in a modern day perspective here is because especially in the academic world, we are being faced with the old ChatGPT quite a lot, and it's a very effective tool. I actually had a go there today, and I asked it.
Nikki, there's a lot of people I didn't know actually up until 2 months ago what ChatGPT was.
Oh, look, Wendy, it's okay. This is all very new, as in this thing literally
young ones
chats
are
you,
much more familiar with all of this stuff. So
I feel like I'm getting a lesson here as well.
Yeah, well, I have to be on the ball, lads. I'm dealing with the youngsters here. I'm dealing with the youngsters every day.
Relics, yeah.
I have to be aware that half the answers that are coming into me in UCD are written by ChatGPT. So yeah, just like, well, I was actually quite surprised. I was like, I'll give it a go. So I said today I'd ask ChatGPT about.
So this is basically artificial intelligence.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I need to go back a step.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
ChatGPT is artificial intelligence, whereby it basically consumes all the information that it finds on the internet, and it's able to reply to your message and kind of hone that as you go. But be very careful of it. Like, I have seen it make ridiculous mistakes and can produce unbelievably believable stuff that's not true. So just be very careful of it. But I must say I was very impressed with it today, because I asked it, can you create a deworming schedule for my horse? And look at this. It says, but it's always best to work with your vet to tailor a plan specifically for your horse. I couldn't have been more proud of ChatGPT in that moment. So yeah, like, and it actually came up with a really good plan. I was very impressed with it. And even at the end, it talked about having a vet involved. So as we fight Dr. Google and now, unfortunately, Dr. ChatGPT, I swear they'll do me out of a job. We really need to start to find that nuance that comes with, interacting with your vet on farm. And so we've done a couple of studies around this, and some of the things that we found when a big thing for me is that I find that sometimes in veterinary we're very hierarchical. We love to tell people what to do and never ask them what they can do. And so we have this big push now, both in AMR and so that's antimicrobial resistance, and then we call it AOR, which is anthelmintic resistance. We have a big push on finding out what people are doing and why they're doing it, because if we don't understand that, sure, how can we make any change? And so what we found really was the biggest driver of what people do is tradition. But what I wanted to, I know there's a lot of information on the slide, but what I really wanted you to look at here was that the veterinary input was associated with clinical disease. And so people didn't see the vet role as part of a prevention program. In fact, what a lot of people would say is, oh, Jesus, I had to make sure it was wormed now, because if the vet came and he had colic, I'd be killed. Do you know what I mean? Rather than, okay, well, let's talk to my vet and see what I should be doing and how I should be doing it. And another one I wanted you to just look at here is antibiotic resistance, they were saying was an industry threat rather than an on-farm issue. So people had this idea that it was out there, but they certainly didn't associate it with their own farm. And just to give you a little talk about resistance, so this is one of my favorite slides. The Parascaris is your roundworm that the young foals get and die of, and then Cytostomin is the small red worm, which would probably be the parasite that would kill most adult horses. And as you can see here, all these points along the way is actually where resistance has been found to different classes of wormers. And so this slide here, all you need to know is that every wormer that we have available to us in horses has been shown to be resistant in both the most dangerous worm in foals and the most dangerous worm in adults. Okay. So,
and Nikki, maybe even just to emphasize, like often when the conversation of resistance comes, well, sure, like that's in America or that's in Germany or that's somewhere else. Like, are we talking Ireland here, you know?
It's a very, very good point, because that comes to my next slide. It's almost like we planned it, Wendy. Slick, I would say. Microcyclic lactones are ivermectins and moxidectins, okay? So we have it in England, and we have a question mark over us because there was a claim of imported resistance into America from Ireland. So that's like our golden bullets. Like, they're the ones that people are like, oh, no, I gave the horse Equest. They're covered. Like, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that moxidectin, Equest Pramox, ivermectin, so your Equimax, etc. Okay. And also we're seeing it basically anywhere anyone's looking, to be honest. Same with our parental. And then I put the greens, that's actually fenbendazole. So, you know, our panicure that we love to hold on to, and we say our 5 days panicure, he's covered. I've done 5 days panicure. Well, you can see how many countries have resistance to panicure. And again, the only reason we don't know if it's in Ireland is because we haven't looked. In fact, I was on a farm 2 weeks ago who sell foals for big money and would associate with a very, very good farm. And we did check to see if there was resistance to panicure in their weanlings, and there was. So when we look at that, basically of there's 58 studies done on panicure. Right, fenbendazole is the official name, but panicure, and 100% of them have shown up resistance. Okay, so we're not just like scaremongering; it's actually here. And then similarly in microcyclic lactones, in the last 10 years, that's when we've seen the increase. So it's starting to come on board, and then our parentals, we have a good lot of resistance, up to 90% of the studies that were done. So, you know, just because we haven't looked here does not mean it's not here. I can tell you from my own experience, because I do a lot of consultancy on farms with vets. And yeah, we definitely see it as we go. So that's one side of why we need to start looking at these things, that we really are starting to face into resistance because of our misuse of the drugs that we have. But the second thing then is what Hazel touched on. So it's this introduction of kind of new legislation. It's actually not new. We managed to get away with it in typical Irish form for the past 6 years.
2007 or so, yeah.
Right. Everyone else had to adhere to it. We found some loophole that has now been undone. But what we see it as is maybe an opportunity that people will really now look to vets and say, hey, can you actually do something with this? And just give us what we call that legislative gateway. So give us like that step in, that foot in the door for the cup of tea that we can have, that we can actually discuss what's going on farm. So the questions I get asked all of the time, when do I deworm my horse and what do I deworm it with? Because anyone who thinks about parasite control only seems to think of wormers, and I can blame lots of different things for that, and I'm not going to, because I know, Wendy, we're not meant to be controversial. But basically the thing is that this worming program, this magical worming program, people keep asking me for, how you've been sold a pup. It's not a thing. And the more black and white someone makes more worming, the more you should realize they don't know what they should be talking to you about. And so when we talk about calendar-based parasitology, what you're not considering are an awful lot of factors. So that's why this slide was created, because there's different types of parasites, and particularly you know, when it comes to things like tapeworm and whatnot, we need to consider those things. The age of horse is crucial. Using fecal egg counts in a foal, for instance, not a good idea. Using fecal egg counts in a well-established adult, good idea. You know, antimimentic regime, what's been used before? If your farm has been using Panicure for the past 15 years, unlikely that it's as effective as you'd like it to be. Then, have you considered any of the climatic or environmental factors? Guys, it's such a big player at the moment. If there is grass growth, there is parasites. And then, of course, we have all the horse factors, their gut flora. We're starting to do some work on that. It's very interesting. And then, what do we actually do on farm? And that is actually the crucial point. What are you doing on farm? What's your pasture management like? What's your stocking density like? It doesn't matter if you're using the best wormer out there, if you're not doing good parasite control according to non-wormer factors, then you might as well just put it down the drain. So the thing is that what we're trying to make people realize is that when it comes to the individual or the herd, and you're wondering about parasitology control, we're talking about risk. So just to give you an example, and I promise I've only one or two more slides, this is an educational parasitology, so I won't be going through life cycles or anything, but often I'll get a call and be like, hey, Nikki, any chance you give us a worming protocol for a small stud? And I'll be like, you'll have to give me a bit more than that, because if you think about it, you could have a really well managed stud, okay, where they have cross grazing, which means that they have other animals such as cattle and sheep that can eat up those larvae, and the larvae don't continue, or eat up the parasites and they don't produce. They can have a closed herd where they know the status of their herd and they know that there isn't animals coming in with resistant profiles or things like that. And they could be really focused on where they're worming and why, okay? Or you could have a small stud farm that maybe has a decent stallion who has multiple visiting mares, that they're like, you know, these fields, the fields you look out and all you can see is dung everywhere and tufts of grass because it's really horse tired. They use horse manure as fertilizer, which of course is just seeding the land with parasites. And then they might just blanket deworm with something like Panicure, which, as we've just shown, mightn't be as effective as we'd like it to be. So for one, you know, you could have just strategic worming for foals, you could have diagnostics for your adults, and then you might combine that for your young stock. And the thing is that the only way we can know that is if we're on farm and we're chatting to you about it, and we know your stock and we know how it runs. Because on the other side, if I came onto that red farm, I might have to do a lot of different things. Firstly, I might have to change management. I might have to see if there's anything that we can do about that. Is there anything we can implement on that? And I need to talk to you about what you can do on your farm, instead of just writing you a script for an antimimentic. That's not going to solve the problem that's been caused because of management issues, okay? Similarly, people will ring me, they're like, I've got a 5-year-old cob, Nikki, what'll I give it? I've got an 8-year-old mare, Nikki, what'll I give it? I've got a 6-month-old foal, Nikki, what'll I give it? Okay. Again, take this 5-year-old cob. If he was born on farm, he's been covered with a nice wormer, maybe after the grazing season, around November, December. He's out with another like really low risk horse, like an 8-year-old hunter, and they've got loads of grass. Well, then you mightn't even need to be wormed. But maybe he's fostered from a rescue. Maybe he hasn't been wormed since he arrived. And now he's out in grass with 2 or 3 weanlings. They have not much grass, horse tired fields, completely different story. So for one, we mightn't do worm, we might just do fecal egg counts and see how we're going. And for the other, we might do added diagnostics in case they're susceptible to maybe a much more serious parasitic disease. Okay, so yeah, that's me. Stop sharing there. But it's just, I suppose, Wendy, to give you an idea that like we have a problem. We've now been given the opportunity to get involved, and we'd love people to ask us. That would basically be my summary.
And I suppose really like what I'm hearing in emphasis from you there is that like there are limitations with the diagnostics. They shouldn't be looked at in isolation. The sort of the whole farming system, the risks, the whole management system is so important to look at in its totality. So that comes back to the title of our conversation for this evening, which is really the importance of that the knowledge of your practice vet or your farm vet, of your system, your system that can create a program that's tailored to your farm. And what's needed in your specific situation.
And
Yeah.
it's not even what's needed sometimes, Wendy. It's what people can do, you know. And the only way you know that, like I said, is if you get your foot in the door and you have that cup of tea, because then you figure out what people can implement. And it might even just be a small change, like where they put their foals out, they might poo pick there. Or if they have visiting mares, they might isolate them. And that could be a huge contributor to decreasing the disease risk, you know. So yeah.
And I suppose part of what I'm hearing from you as well, and that is that you would love if clients would bridge to the point of feeling that the vet is approachable, not just for clinical disease conversation, but also from the perspective, and more importantly, from the perspective of preventative health management. And
100%.
that's the space that you would love to see us progressing towards. Yeah.
Yeah, and like there is an onus on vets as well. Like, and we have, you know, we've this whole thing going on in the background. I promise it will come out to the fore eventually, Wendy. But that, you know, we are working on guidelines that, and we're working with stakeholders, working with end users, we're working with owners to try and establish good guidelines. But we're also working with the vets, and we have a course that 20 vets went through last year, and hopefully we'll have another 20 this year, which is based on this kind of system. So instead of you saying, here, is there any chance you could come out, and they go, oh, sure, just give it ivermectin twice a year, it will be more like, yeah, actually I can come out, and yeah, I can. And you
Nikki,
know,
I've really enjoyed the visits you've done to some of the farms that I work on, and they've
Oh, yeah,
all
definitely,
seen
yeah.
they've all seen better weight gain of their animals. They've seen reduced feed usage, and they've seen a reduction in the use of dewormers.
Yeah,
Just with some simple things. See, I think
cost
people have
effective on top of everything else.
yeah, and I
You're
think
you're leading exactly into that space where I was going to go next, Sue, which is around the fact that sometimes people perceive these new impingements as being cost barriers.
oh, this is the big misconception with it. So, any of the farms that Nikki or Siobhan have been involved in that I do work on, they've all seen a reduction in the cost of these dewormers, because they tend to be using dewormers in a manner where they'd say, well, I gave all the foals this particular one, and all the mares were done with this at this particular time of year. And I'm scratching my head, and you know, initially it could be a phone call or just a discussion, and then I myself might go out and do it. Or if it's a larger kind of entity, I'm delighted always to have Nikki or Siobhan on board. And I think I'll just relate back to Nikki's first slide, which said a modern day perspective. I think that's often where the frustration lies, because I'm sure every listener this evening, and certainly all my clients, get really frustrated because they genuinely think that they're doing the right thing, because that's what they've been taught all along. And unfortunately, resistance is happening. It's growing every day, and methods are changing, and that modern day perspective is certainly something which needs to be taken on board. And you know, just thinking today about the title of this, the client practice patient relationship, and what that means to me. It could be a cup of tea, as you mentioned, Nikki, but it could equally just be something as simple as a phone call. And, you know, we're talking about dewormer resistance, anthelminthic resistance. We're also talking about antimicrobial resistance, antiviral resistance, antifungal resistance. So just taking it back to something so simple. And again, this links in with costs. Okay, so I might get a phone call from a client to say, my horse has had a foot abscess for the last week, and I have a bottle of penicillin there, and I'd really, really like to give it a shot of penicillin. Do you think that'd be okay? Well, actually, it's a total waste of money. For a couple of different reasons. Number one, penicillin is highly unlikely to actually penetrate the foot. And secondly, it's highly unlikely to hit the bugs that are actually in the foot, causing the perceived abscess in the first place. So often in situations like that, we will volunteer to go out and dig out the foot abscess, or maybe call the farrier in and just bandage up the foot and put a poultice on and drain it out. Don't be tempted to go down that track. Equally, if it's been there for a week, it might need further intervention. Okay, it might need an X-ray, and yes, there's an expense with an X-ray, we know this. But ultimately, it may be a situation, if worst comes to worst on farm, that you're guided down the right track with antibiotics. And maybe we might advise using something like doxycycline, which will penetrate the foot and will actually hit the bug, which, at that point, we might be suspicious that there's something in the bone. So all that starts with picking up the phone,
And
literally
I
just
know,
picking up the phone.
I,
And
I know something else that you mentioned in a previous conversation.
a phone call's free.
Well, near as. But I know something else that you mentioned previously as well. So the kind of a little bit of a bugbearer of yours is, where the client or the individual, rings looking for that bottle of penicillin or whatever, as opposed to kind of
Yeah,
presenting,
I mean,
I have such and such an issue. What do you think should be the approach here?
yeah. So, I mean, I just think that the big message that I would like to kind of convey there this evening is that we know that everyone listening and anyone that's going to listen to this afterwards, everyone has their horse's health in best stead and in mind. There's no question about that. But unfortunately, the medicine and the science behind all this is changing so dramatically. And, at this moment in time, certainly Ireland is way behind other countries in implementing sensible use of antibiotics. And as it was mentioned earlier on, like those EU rules have been in existence in other European countries for a very long time. Taking the example even of Switzerland, they tend not to use antibiotics at all without a culture and sensitivity. So just to explain what that means, um, taking a sample of the infected area and growing it on a plate, and I'll put that plate right up there. You're growing it on one of these little guys in an incubator, and then going ahead and figuring out which antibiotic actually works with one of these. I don't know if you can see, but these little
Yeah.
red guys are actually antibiotics. And when they're put on a plate that's been, purified, they will very easily show you what antibiotics work and what don't, so that's the line that we need to be going down. And of course there's practicalities attached to these things, but often the most common phone call that I get, or one of them is, my animal has had a cut, and can I have some sachets of TMS, or can I have some penicillin? And often it's just not even needed, Often it's not needed. Um, and within reason, there's a lot that can be achieved in the right direction, protecting all these drugs that we have. There's a lot that can be done over the phone and even in pictures. And then, I've given the example of the foot abscess, and then just to bring kind of link back into Nikki's chat on dewormers, I have a number of stud farms there. There's one in particular where they have a lot of yearlings on the farm, a lot of foals, and there was very poor weight gain. They looked quite scanty. So we got to action and we started looking into all of the problems. And the large complaint from the farm was that they keep pumping feed into these animals, but they weren't getting anywhere. And then we looked at their deworming protocol, and they were pulling their hair out. They're like, we're deworming everything all of the time. But it turned out that they were spending massive amounts of money on the wrong treatments. So they were putting a hole in their own pockets as well as contributing to resistance. So we were lucky enough that when we got them on the right track, that farm, Nikki, had a big ascarid problem. And ascarids are worms which won't necessarily come up on fecal worm egg counts. So you do need the vet to come out and have that cup of tea and have the discussion. And we got them on the correct deworming protocol. And this year at the sales, they've done extremely well. And they're commenting about the fact that even their feed bill has reduced on the head of us. So it's so multi-tiered, you know. And again, just coming back to that conception of, you know, we're a money conscious country, and I see my job as one whereby I can guide my clients to spend their money appropriately. And if they're spending it appropriately, then they're not wasting their money in different areas. And that's certainly the case of that stud farm and other ones that I'm dealing with. So yeah, they're delighted. And what other examples?
Maybe while you're thinking of other examples there, if I come back across to Hazel for a moment. Like Hazel, you know, I suppose like the issues that the ladies are bringing to bear here in terms of the anti-parasitic and the antimicrobial resistances and how they're, you know, how they view they should be looked at or addressed. Like this isn't unique to equine. This is not unique to this sector. This is right across agriculture, right across livestock. You know, what, like in your seat in terms of the bigger picture at the moment, like what do you see as the key positives to come from the changes to come, and maybe the key challenges also to come, you know, in moving forward over the next year, 2 to 5 years? You know, what do you see as the big issues with all of this?
Yeah, so look, I'll start off on the positives. I think that you know, since there was the EU regulation 19.6, so that kind of put a ban on prophylactic use of antibiotics. So that's when we use antibiotics as preventative, as a kind of a, so that would be, for example, with drying off cows. Like it was standard that all cows would have got a antibiotic at drying off. And now it's only cows that have a high cell count, which indicates infection. So it's changing, and how we're prescribing is changing. And I think there's really good, you know, from the data that's there and collected so far, there's about a 20% reduction in antibiotic sales currently since January 2022. So we are going in the right direction. So things are improving, even from talking to, I suppose, farmers are my main clients, and from talking to farmers, they're getting used to the fact that vaccines are, you know, very much priority now, rather than injecting the whole shed of calves with an antibiotic for pneumonia. You know, I can't even like remember the last time that, you know, that was just generally done without an actual problem occurring. So it is definitely changing, and you know, the selective dry cow as well is going in the right direction. Confidence is a huge thing, and I think it's with the equine clients as well, like confidence in actually being like, okay, is it okay, you know, I'll go and ring Sue instead of just using the bottle of antibiotic maybe that I have, or you know, going in and just maybe not having that chat with Sue. And as well with the antiparasitics, just going and getting a wormer for perhaps the wrong type of worm that the horse has. And I think we need more confidence that we, you know, don't perhaps need to be worming as much or need to be very much targeting wormers. Like I was on a farm the other day, and I was doing a TB test. And because the cows were going to, or the weanlings were going to be in the crush on day 2 at the reading, it was just, Hazel, what weight are they? What weight are those weanlings? And I was kind of thinking, I don't know, 300 kilos, 350 kilos. They were really nice, perfectly healthy weanlings, not a cough in sight, no scour, absolutely thriving. This was kind of middle of September now. And I said, why? And he said, oh, I have a poron. And he named a particular type of poron that was really expensive. And he was like, oh, I'm just going to do them with that while they're in. And I said, why though? And he said, oh, well, sure, they're in the crush. It's handy. And I said, no. Let's take a sample when they're in the crush. Let's take a sample. Put your mind at ease. Within the clinic that I work in, they have an in-house parasitology machine. So he handed in the sample. What do you know? Not a worm in sight. So there wasn't no need to worm those weanlings. And it was only really when I mentioned probably the economic benefit of not worming them at that stage and maybe waiting till housing. So look, it's all about confidence. I think we get used to a certain way, and my dad would have always treated the animals, his calves and young stock, on a calendar basis, and it's moving away from that. So that's exactly what Nikki was talking about. So I think your presentation was brilliant, Nikki. I've learned a lot. It is that thing as well about research, isn't it? There's so much more research to do, especially within Ireland. Like when I was looking at the research in the farm side, a lot of it is quite old. A lot of it is 8 or 9, 10 years old. And there was resistance, like 70% of sheep in Ireland are resistant to white drenches. So that's the white drench that we've used generally in our sheep populations, our calf populations for years. And 70% are resistant. And that was in 2014. How many now are resistant? So it's a scary number when we look at that, and we do need to put things in place. And I think when we do delve into what's actually going on and research, and it's ongoing, and it's brilliant to hear about all the UCD, and I think Teagasc as well is doing ongoing research into the farm side of things as well, and like the Animal Health Ireland TASAs, the consults that vets were doing on farm with farmers over the last 2 years. They weren't there this year, but over the showed that 70% of the tests that were submitted with that scheme didn't need any action. There was no worms, there was no eggs seen. So it's amazing when you start looking what you find. So I think without knowing, we need knowledge as power, I really think, with the parasite control and working with your vet and doing all the things there that Nikki and Sue were talking about. I think it's fantastic. So I think that's my soapbox moment there, perhaps.
You're okay. Just a shout out to our viewers again this evening. A reminder, the Q&A tab is there. If you have comments, even if you'd like to pose a question or pose in a comment, feel free to do so. It's there for your use. I suppose one of the other kind of points, Nikki, I just come back around to you before I go back to Sue. Like obviously you mentioned as one of the points in your presentation, that one of the issues that arises is around a lack of consistency of the advice itself, and and a mistrust that arises then on account of that, and I suppose coming back again to the title, and I guess in a way like the importance of the relationship and knowing who you're working with and all of that. Like, what are your comments around that?
Yes, it's twofold really. So one thing that happens is people think there's lack of consistency in parasite control because there's farm-specific parasite control, right? So what's right for one situation might not be right for another. And so the consistency piece sometimes is that, right? But, and there's a big but, there is also a lack of consistency across the advice that you find on the internet, in different clinics, even with different practitioners within clinics, we're finding as well. And that's why we're looking into all of this and trying to start from the bottom. And that's why we're trying to create equine parasite information and control, also known as EPIC, because we like to big ourselves up. And basically, like, we are trying to establish a centralized, consistent message around what we consider the best practices, if they can be implemented on farm. And similarly, Wendy, we're doing the same in regards to our education in vets, but also hopefully now, Wendy, if we work together, education on owners too. But that that there is that consistent message then, and for me that consistent message is always risk-based, but we even have actually a student at the moment who's looking at all the different sources of information on the internet, and she's to see what's available to people and how it's validated and so on and so forth. And even within different clinics' websites, some of their advice is conflicting. So like I don't blame people for not understanding. I've done a lot of work in parasitology, it's still confusing at times. So I think that can be the biggest source of frustration for owners, is that it's kind of complicated.
But what you're saying is that there are actions underway within the veterinary community to try and, harmonize things in that regard, I guess, is the word to use. And that, like the hope is that moving forward, that things will be improving all the while in that regard.
Yeah, that's why we're doing all the work that we're doing at the moment. Yeah. And that's why we're working with stakeholders. So we've worked with sport horse competitors, sport horse breeders. We've worked with leisure horse people and riding school owners. We've worked with charitable organizations. Like we've done over 8 focus groups now with different organizations as well as vets. And the consistent piece is a centralized source of information. And then back to the point that, people are like, but we don't understand this and we can't do this on my farm and so on. So it's back to that farm specific advice.
Yeah. And coming back over to yourself, Sue, like Hazel mentioned in her last piece there about vaccines, and like how relevant in your eyes is the vaccine piece in all of this. And we know at the moment, like there's even availability issues with certain vaccines, and like there's I suppose, like even in the wider antimicrobial context, like we have to think around, I suppose, the access to and the availability of these products, and being able to have trust as well in that.
Yeah, so we haven't had on the horse side, we haven't had that much of an issue really with getting vaccines in. But I mean, it's the same thing. Prevention is better than cure. So, for example, vaccinating your mares at 8, 9, and 10 months for rotavirus will prevent rotaviral diarrhea in foals when they're born. And I suppose just an all-encompassing health approach. So making sure that they're fed well, making sure that their teeth are right, that their overall immunity is in good stead, and then you will see less disease across your population. And then, everyone wants to do the right thing. So I suppose for listeners, there are things that you can do at home. And Nikki's touched off them with, not putting manure out on the land, because you're basically putting the toilets out where they eat. And also just down to dosing. I heard Hazel say, you estimated the weight in the stocks or in the crush of the animals. So getting a correct weight estimation and really watching how you give these drugs. So, how many times, I'd love to hear like how many times any of us have given a dewormer to a horse and then, it spills out the side and it's on your clothes, and all those things need to be taken into consideration, and just watching how you go about administering the drugs. I think those things are important, but there isn't a whole lot of information, and there's not a lot of like local studies, but there is a study which has excited me recently, and it's one between Nottingham and Rosdale's, where they went and they looked at what's called the microbiome of the guts of Nikki, you've probably read this, but correct me if I've only read the beginning and the end of this, but my understanding of it is that like these horses that have a diverse microbiome, so they have a diverse gut flora when they're babies, and antibiotics aren't, implemented there, which would reduce the gut flora and the diversity in the gut, they actually go on to perform better. And over a population, they tend to win more races and be better race horses. So what's that mean for me on farm? What that means for me is, I go into, I have my my own farms there at the moment, the regulars, and they all know the story. We've had the chat. They know where we're going with this. But sometimes I will come across places that will want to prophylactically give a shot of penicillin, or I've even heard a pen strep being used, fairly randomly in newborn foals, just as a prophylactic thing, to prevent any infection getting in. So first off, that's most certainly not necessary. You're better off looking at things like the IgG levels of the foals to make sure that it's received enough antibodies from its mum. But also, there's now science and a study which shows that that act could actually have a negative impact upon the horse's performance on the track later on in life. So I'm really excited about that study.
A couple of questions come in there. Okay. One is commenting that they would like to see parasite testing being promoted or supported through I suppose schemes here with the national government.
Incentivization. Wouldn't we all? My God.
Yeah.
They rolled out a lovely Teagasc scheme for last, which Hazel spoke to. And I think there was something over 6,000 farm visits as a result, to do with parasitology control.
It'd be wonderful if that was extended to stud farms and equine premises. I think we would definitely encourage whoever's listening to that would be fantastic, and it would give. It's such a fabulous way to get on farm and have that chat and actually have that designated time. Nikki, we found it was as a farm vet, it was super, and I think it's definitely needed in the equine world.
Yeah, incentivization, unfortunately, is going to be the big carrot. So I completely agree with I have absolutely zero power. But if I did, that's what
just in case anybody confuses matters here either, that is not in our remit.
No, it's not yours either. No.
Yeah, it's not in our remit either yet. There's another query here. It's kind of almost like it needs to have the conversation, that cup of tea with the vet at home, in relation to low grass growth over the last number of months, grazing horses, cattle and sheep, with the humid weather, animals hairy, coughing, any advice or comments. And I suppose that's really back to this situation that we're talking about this evening, which is the importance of that.
That's why we can't give you advice. Yeah, it's the personal part. However, of course, your
there is a problem. You need to pick up the phone.
Yeah. So this is like, I suppose this is back to I suppose emphasizing again I suppose the change in behavior in some ways, I guess, that you guys would like to encourage in terms of like the starting point being to have that relationship with your own vet at home, to really bring that into the realm of, as much as, like was pointed out by Nikki, the reality when there is that that actual what's the word I'm looking for, the clinical disease situation that needs to be addressed, but bringing it back a step from that and taking it into the realm of having the conversation about the preventative as well. But this is a situation where there's clinical disease, and this needs to be, or clinical symptoms, shall we say, that needs to be discussed one-on-one with their own vet.
There's no, like, it's an interesting question where it looks like there could be multiple things going on with the horses anyway. I couldn't comment on the cattle and sheep now. That's more Hazel's forte, but it looks like it's multifactorial, and that looks like it's beyond chat over the phone and probably needs a visit.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And Hazel, I'm going to come back around to you again, because part of, I know, the kind of the conversation from yourselves from Veterinary Ireland is around your worries and concerns, I guess, around the challenge of, when it comes to it, when this legislation is actually in place, and when, you know, like I suppose the anti-parasitics, for example, are the prescription only medication and all of this, and obviously operating with the National Prescription Service as well too. Part of the as I understand it, the concern from yourselves is around, you know, like who will actually be writing these prescriptions at individual farm level. Would you like to comment a little on that, or, you know, what your worries or concerns are in that regard?
Well, I think that we've always, you know, for the last year or so have been campaigning that the vet with the CPPR should be the vet that prescribes these medications, and it's not like prescribing is not you know, sale of product. It's prescribing, and then the client has the option of where to buy that product. So it has never been that, you know, you have to buy everything in a certain place. It is that the product, that medicine, is prescribed by the vet with the most knowledge of your farm. So you're actually, you know, in the long run, getting the best value for money, because you're getting a product that's actually tailored to your situation, your system. And then you can go with that prescription as if, you know, you got a prescription from your doctor, and you can go to any pharmacist to fill that. So it's the prescribing that Veterinary Ireland are really campaigning, that the CPPR is so important, and for the general public to really recognise that. So that's where we stand, and I think it's as a vet, it's an important stance to have, and I think it makes sense when you think about it, and when you look at all these products. And, you know, we talk about, you know, products, we have very, very few wormers. It is not a case that we have, you know, maybe when you go into you know, into a place and you see the wormers on the shelf, you think, oh, there's loads, but actually the ingredients in those are very much repeated, and we have a very limited amount of wormers that we can choose, and we need those to work for the future. There is certain parts of, you know, in the Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand, Australia, that they are not able to farm anymore because of parasites overload, and they cannot control their parasites. Ireland is an extremely wonderful place for parasites to live. We need these medications. Exactly. Yeah,
Parasite,
it is.
paradise.
And it's, you know, look, that's the joy of living on an island in the Atlantic, that we have that kind of lovely temperate, you know, humid environment for them to live. And we really, really do need to protect the future of our horses, our farm animals, our dogs and cats, everything. It's all encompassing with, you know, with how we prescribe.
And that goes equally for the antimicrobials as well too, in protecting the access and use of the best quality antimicrobials for the future as well too. Nikki, there is a question here. I'll be fair to the describer and throw it out as the last one before we wrap things up here. But the query is around the storage period, I guess, for.
You know, Wendy, I get this question all the time.
I'm wondering why I didn't do a PhD on manure.
You get this question all the time.
I get this question all the time. Unfortunately, no one has done that research. No one has looked at poo piles and assessed them. We do know that when they get to a certain temperature, usually over kind of 27, 28 degrees, you will get desiccation of the eggs. Fair enough. If you can put a thermometer in there and find that out for yourself, absolutely, because again, different poo piles, different ways of doing them, etc. So my advice in this always is, if you don't have a parasite problem on your farm, and that doesn't mean like horses dying of colic, that means horses who aren't thriving, horses who aren't doing as well, or maybe you have resistance that you don't know. But if you don't have any of those issues and you're using manure on your farm, then that's fine. If you have any sniff of the fact that you might have a parasite problem on your farm, you're going to have to find a different way of getting rid of that manure. Maybe swapping with a farmer down the road and taking cattle manure and putting it on your pasture, no problem. But a lot of people don't want horse manure, unfortunately, because it's usually full of shavings or straw or whatever that might be. But yeah.
And obviously as well, there's very different approaches to the manure management itself as well too. And you know, those who, like you say, use the thermometers, those who turn manure, those who aerate manure, those who, you know, do that, as opposed to the pile just sort of is there for a relatively short period of time and put back out, or the farm that has more extensive space
or maybe
follows the manure with sheep
Yeah.
on that pasture. You know, there's ways and means, but unfortunately,
you know, to wait before animals go back out on it, and all of these different
things that they can
scenarios.
put in place.
yeah.
It's a little bit like the conversation around the anti-parasitics to begin. There isn't a one stop answer to that question.
And that's why people don't like talking
about parasites. But just to Hazel and Sue's point, you know, if you get they did one really cool study where they had resistance to a particular antibiotic on a farm, and a particular farm, and they stopped using that antibiotic, and they were tracking that farm anyway because it was part of a bigger, wider study. And they went back 20 years later, and gave the wormer, and there was still resistance. So just, you know, once you get it, that's it. So if you think you might have it, you should really look.
And that is like such a scary thought, given the limited, like Hazel said, and we all understand the limited number of.
Not the scaremonger, Wendy,
but like there are farms where horses are now not allowed go because of resistant worms. They cannot take other horses on.
So
if you want to end on that positive note.
well, I'm going to give, I am actually, as much as that is a very poignant note to finish that part of the conversation.
Sorry, Wendy.
Yeah, listen, look, it makes the point very eloquently. I am going to give the opportunity, and maybe I'm going to start with you, Nikki, so that I can work in reverse and leave with a more positive
note. Yeah, go on.
Is there something in terms of either a comment or a piece of advice that you would like to leave as the kind of the parting, and maybe try and find like a positive note to give to people to finish out from your point?
Yeah, I think it's just some.
So what Sue and Hazel were saying is just have the conversation, you know, just have the conversation. That's all we're asking for. And if your vet isn't up to having that conversation, let's say it comes to parasites or whatever, just ask the vet to talk to, you know, someone like myself or whatever. We don't like to go in place of the vet. We are vets ourselves, obviously, but just have the conversation, you know, and don't just put your head in the sand, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or head in the manure pile, as it might be.
Actually, another one of our listeners has contributed that to their knowledge there's a digester being constructed in Carlow, and they're trying to source horse bedding and manure to feed that. So
sure, win. I can use that in my next talk.
There we go. So you can get in contact with us and let us know more details about that. All right,
that'd be great,
listener. So yeah, Hazel, I'll come across to you then, you know, for the same, for either a parting comment or piece of advice or something positive that you'd like to give, a positive message that you'd like to leave people with here this evening.
I think something that I've noticed, I suppose I am a little bit removed from the real equine world in my day-to-day, and I think it's great that, you know, I can very much be part of this conversation, and it's very much across the different sectors, and it's just lovely that we can all come together and talk about it, and that we are kind of all in this together, and it's great to have unity across different sectors, and yeah, we just have to all work like it's all the one health. We're all in it together. I know it's kind of cliche, but really we all have a part to play in safeguarding the future of these medicines. So that's kind of.
Not all, you're so right, and it has been wonderful to have you with us in the conversation here this evening as well. So appreciate your time on that as well. And Sue, kind of the ignition point for this conversation was with yourself. So I leave the parting words to you on it. What's your the passion within you that you want to exchange on this topic? What do you want to leave people thinking about tonight?
It's very simple, and it's the same as the whole team. Just pick up the phone. That's literally it. We are here to help. We are here to improve things. We have a very good knowledge base. Pick up the phone.
Well, listen, from my side, thank you so much to the three of you. You're all busy people, and to give up your time of an evening, it's greatly appreciated. So thank you very, very much. And I want to also extend thanks to the listeners who've been with us here this evening. Your time and your engagement is also very much appreciated. And I hope that each of you that were with us this evening got something from the conversation and will change even one thing. Pick up that phone. All right. So one thing, pick up that phone. So thanks, everybody. The Zoom machine is a rude one when it comes to the end of affairs, and it is press that red button. It's almost like Graham Norton's eject sheet or seat, shall I say? So that's the end point. So from me to you, thank you, and to everybody else, until the next time. Good night and take care.
You, Wendy.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.